Morning, fellas. It's Ben Virgin here on Ben's World Postman Productions. How you find me on the website. I'm not going to put any of the links behind this today because I'm just really sort of thinking aloud, and I might build on it later on and then come back and do another video. But um, we're looking at the fires in Australia, and the blame game's good. Everyone's saying, "Oh, this is the blame, this is the blame." As far as I can work out, there's like numerous factors involved. One of them is increased temperature. People, I think it's a Greer paper or so, since 1987, maybe I might put that link below. Um, but one of the professors basically wrote a paper about the bushfire factor relating to the issue of what we came to know as climate change, and that was 1987. Now, again, people get in this whole sort of, get all hysterical when they hear that word. They're passionate about it. Oh, he said it's happening. It's not really the issue. The issue was policy at certain state in the 1980s turned around and said, look, we're going to have this is going to happen. We're going to have increased temperatures. This is what the consequences was. Again, very logical thought process, because I think I originally started to become interested in the whole issue of climate change issues around about the same time frame. And what I was, concerned with was things like you get places like Indonesia, we've got 220 million people. You're not even having to talk about radical weather changes there. Even just a slight increase in temperature is enough to affect their typhoon seasons, which will basically wipe out their rice crops. No food, you have a political, destabilization process. Suddenly you've got 220 million people looking at Australia going, oh, maybe we want in New Zealand, maybe we'll want those resources. So I was always interested about the whole issue of the geopolitics of what climate change would mean, regardless of what the cause is. Obviously, people in the Australian CSIRO, which is the scientific body, had the same process. So they were writing papers saying, well, this is what we need to be doing in the future. Step one, of course, was that those papers were largely, by and large, ignored. It's also very similar. I find it very interesting that you look at local things like in Dunedin in New Zealand, Otago, and we had a woman there that was I think, chief executive about 8-9 years ago, and she was saying instead of building rugby stadiums and vanity things which are all just creating debt, we should be putting in core infrastructure to deal with issues of rising flood levels, soil erosion, etc., etc. And she literally got laughed out of the job, and she went somewhere else where they appreciate her. And suddenly we've got administrations that say, oh, we care about climate change, and yes, we should be doing this. I'm skeptical because the same group of people that turn around and say that are actually quite happy to bring in the cruise ship market, which of course has a huge carbon footprint. However, let's stick with the fires in Australia. So even though they had long-term planning, they ignored it. There were bushbacks in terms of clearings of bush to cut down to avoid fires from occurring. Again, because of the carbon sequestration value of those trees, no, you can't do that. So they were allowed to provide food to that area, which actually, feed the fuel, which of course is now burning more trees, which is of course destroying more carbon, which is kind of ironic from the carbon sequestration. But there wasn't any of that long-term thinking. We're like, oh no, we're going to carry out a short-term policy, which has, there were plenty of, they said the CSIR would have turned around and said, no, that's actually a really dumb thing to do. There was an ignoring of Indigenous Australian methods. Now, again, I sort of try a fly these ideas past my father, he lives in Coolangatta in the Gold Coast, and he's still 84 years old, surfs the back waves, and knows the area, and the weather conditions pretty well. So I talked to him about these things. He says, well, yeah, that's the Indigenous methods were to a degree still limited, and also because of the fact that technology changes, they weren't such a big deal. But we could still adapt to those methodologies for the technologies and the changing urban situations. And it was one more tool in the toolbox that wasn't actually used. I'm reading a lot of reports too now about fires that are caused by the issue of trucks carrying fuel. That apparently is something which has, again, never been really dealt with because the dollars were more important than the risk factor. So it was just business as usual. There's a very good article out there where one of the volunteer firemen is basically saying, well, actually, this is, we're talking, we want to blame the Greens, we want to do that, and climate change, we should have been talking about that 3-4 years ago, not today, when it's already too late. And I said again, it doesn't matter what your viewpoints about what the cause is behind that issue. The reality is people have been having these conversations, and for ages, and nobody's done anything. And for the basic infrastructural things that you could have done, regardless of what your bigger picture, belief systems are, they just were not done. We then have, of course, the fact that you have this sort of like Antarctica wind that's coming off Antarctica at the moment, which works in a 6-year, 7-year cycle. It's making the sky drier. That's contributing to the fire factor. But again, something that is a circular, so should have been built into the planning. We then get into the realms of things where we start to look at things like the issues of HARP and Doppler radar, which have actually been active in those areas. And I backtrack that a little bit because before we started even talking about Australian fires, I was talking about the White Island situation, and I was correlating along with a series of light plane crashes that have been taking place in New Zealand and in Chile and the United States. And every time I lifted up the rock, I'd find a big bit of military hardware, and the person that had died actually was involved in investigating this area. And it happened enough for me to turn around and say, well, I think we're onto something here. At the moment in New Zealand, we have been seeing this situation where people have been seeing these 30, 40 UFOs traveling across the sky, always at 11 o'clock. I dug around, traced around, cut down, and turns out actually they're part of this whole thing called Skylink, which has been put up by Elon Musk, and when you turn around and discover that's actually $28 million, and what they're doing is they're doing an exercise to see whether or not they can use civilian GPS systems to back up military systems in the event of a war. And so as a test of this first lot, and they're going to be launching something like 12,000 of these things in the sky, but this first lot is an assessment area. And it's one more bit of that space hardware that we're seeing popping up around all this area where you've got people, basically what I'm saying is there suddenly seems to be a need to have a large ability to transmit signals of a high level, which I think that's kind of interesting. So it adds to the whole issue of we've seen a lot of these electromagnetic and microwave-based technology in these areas which are causing fire. And even like here out in Southland, you've got Aurora Bay, which is part of the directional finding of systems like HARP. For years, now when I first pointed that actually out, in all the scientific documents from Canterbury University and so on, now the next step was they started to take all that stuff actually out. But I managed to backtrack because they still managed to make reference to the SuperDARN signal system. And then again, when you turn around and look at SuperDARN and the relationship to HARP, even though they may have taken the word HARP out of the documents now, it doesn't change the fact that it's the same situation. And in Aurora Bay, which is the directional finder, which basically kind of controls, as the signals being beamed from the two ends, they want to make sure the altitude is correct and the latitude is correct. And this is part of the targeting system, but it's an area which actually often bursts into fire. I mean, you go and look around that whole Aurora Bay. Like I think I looked at online that I found something like 20 fires breaking on. That's the area that kind of comes down the bottom of the south and that goes into Fiordland, where you've got Deep Cove, which again there's been a lot of activity around that particular area. The instance effectively, even last year where we've got mass strandings and so on. It's an area where they wanted to put the Omega facility station and submarine spawning. So this area kind of travels all the way through to Macquarie Island, which again you've got another tracking system, and they were doing both rainmaking, which again throughout New South Australia, you've got things, companies like the Snowy Hydro Engineering Corporation, that you can go online and find that they're doing this, and the materials that they use for the substance is actually highly flammable retardant as well. So again, if you go to the World Meteorological Service or the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, and they have a registry of weather modification, and you'll find that Australia is one of the list of countries which they will acknowledge that they've been doing cloud seeding, which uses this flammable material. So that's another contributing cause. And then again, the next step we see is in these same areas, which are high risk areas, we see them carrying out military exercises where the planes are distributing chaff, which again, one of the issues when you look at the US military kind of issue and why there's a question about whether chaff sitting right now about people want to kick it into touch. But that withstanding is the main thing is, yes, chaff is also something that actually it's flammable. It's aluminum, so they've been spraying this area, which is high risk area. The brakes haven't been allowed to go, and putting more basically stuff that's going to make the fires even hotter into that area. And that in turn, again, of course, the other situation you get turned around is that you look at situations in a lot of these areas like the Darling River, where you've actually had the water, for water privatisation, is actually, even though they know this area is going to have increasingly hotter temperatures because of their own scientific material going back 1980s, they've gone, sure, go along, buy some water. We don't need it. Help yourselves. It's not like we're going to have any great fires or anything. So you now look at areas which are now increasingly drier because of the water has been actually pumped out and sold onwards. And of course, when the firefighting does go to fight them, they don't have the water reserves in those areas to fight them. And we even have cases where they're actually dams have been on record as being dumped into the ocean. So and then you get issues of the fire service, the budgets have been cut, the legislating them, so it's actually basically harder for people to get into the fire services, and they need them for the benefit of these volunteer fire services, that they are legislating them so that they're not allowed to do crowdfunding raising. So even though they're getting their budget cut, they're not allowed to go out and like have a sausage sizzle. I don't know, that's a bit ironic, to do it. And then you turn around and find that the chief of the fire department was saying to the government, well, actually, we're going to need more of these large air. And even though I said about the fire retardant, the chief in his information thinks he's doing the right thing, so he says, oh, we're going to need larger firefighting planes, doesn't get them. So, what you're all looking at collectively is 14 to 15 factors which combined from the viewpoint of, these are the things that you need to do to reduce the fires, they've done nothing for. So they've actually they've literally created a perfect storm condition to actually ensure these fires actually come about. Why you would do that, in fact, the answer is fairly simple, straightforward. The next thing that's going to happen in Australia is that Australia is not going to be able to provide its own food, just like in Indonesia. So you're going to have huge sorts of problems there, but it's also going to enhance the whole concept of food monopolisation. We've already got water privatisation going through. So it becomes this whole process of pushing it towards this tool which allows them or enhances the ability to centralise power. So that's pretty much all the nutshell of what I'm saying today. I've got one last thought process which I'm going to share with you guys, and I would like you to have a bit of a think about this. And this is, as I said, amusing, so I'm not making any hardcore facts. But what does concern me is that suddenly what we've got is these fires, which, aside from being sprayed with a material which is not just a flame retardant, but it actually has a refractive property. A lot of these things are using products that have got barium or aluminum or other materials which are really good for signal propagation. And the three things along that line was the early March 2019 was the rocket was launched at Rocket Lab, which its main purpose was to basically act as a huge signal propagation. So it was designed for using technologies that would require a large, powerful signal base area. You combine that with, these materials that are spraying for fire retardants, the material that's been used in military exercises, which is chaff, which is, again, naturally designed to, these sort of forms can be used to block radar or jam radar, but they can also be used to boost radar. And then, of course, you've got the things like the geoengineering, high-level atmospheric aspect, which, again, enhance the propagation. So all these things collectively are about being there so that they can actually effectively have a boost to what it is ever that they're transmitting up into the sky. And now it has a satellite up there which is designed to help them as well. And of course, if they pick days where they've got good solar conditions or solar flares, that'll help them. But now we've got the situation where we've got this perfect storm going in over Australia that's created its own weather condition, which brings with it thunder and lightning, which basically means your atmosphere gets incredibly ionized. So, if you can imagine that the grass and the soil on the ground is the fuel for that fire that we're now seeing in Australia, well, that fire in turn is providing the fuel to ionization in the atmosphere. So you've got something that's actually got a basically, effectively a super battery happening over Australia as a result, which coincides at the same time that they're moving on all these hard assets into the area, which are largely designed in simple terms for the purposes of sticking the iron knife in the electric toaster. It's concerning that they should send this specific hardware into an area at the time where those conditions are, and it makes me think, well, effectively they're kind of weaponising an entire nation. Now, I know that's all for many of you people who are not familiar with these concepts like next level shit. Um, but I just wanted to add you to think about that aspect from, what is the military and the geopolitical consequences of doing something like that. But in the meantime, if that's, not where your level's at, just concentrate on the part of my video here where I'm basically saying is that it doesn't matter whether you believe in climate change or not. The point is that there's a whole bunch of factors, collectively together, which have brought about, which have been foreseen, ignored, and in cases not just ignored, but they've done the opposite thing to actually guarantee that this would actually come about. Um, the whys of why they would do that, I said, I think it's about food monopolisation, and maybe there's other things as well. But that ultimately is the only conclusion you can come to when you look at all these factors. The cutting of the firemen, the private water privatisation, so there's not the water there. They're all things which, if you know that you've got climate change and that's where you go, then why go down the road with those policies? Surely would be going the opposite direction. So having said all of that, I'll leave you to think about that one, and have a good day, be safe, and the universe will be just what the universe does at the end of the day. Take care.